Sirens rarely stop at the dead end of Willow Creek Drive. When an armada of matte black Escalades barricaded the crumbling apartment complex, neighbors locked their deadbolts and extinguished their lights. A heavy-set emergency trauma surgeon, exhausted and smelling of harsh antiseptic, stood frozen in her driveway, her keys slipping from trembling, calloused fingers. She had just defied a hospital directive to save an unidentified dying woman. Now, the most ruthless syndicate in the state had come to collect. The payment, however, was not what anyone expected. Dr. Clara Higgins was not the poster child for modern medicine. At 34 years old, she carried 280 pounds on a modest 5'4" frame. Her custom-ordered CS-26 Navy scrubs constantly chafed against her thighs, and her wide-width Brooks running shoes were the only things keeping her plantar fasciitis at bay during 14-hour shifts. In a profession that constantly preached the gospels of BM and lean protein, Clara was a walking contradiction, and an easy target for the sneers of her Ivy League colleagues at St. Jude Medical Center in downtown Chicago. But what Clara lacked in a socially acceptable silhouette, she made up for in sheer, terrifying medical brilliance. It was 2:14 a.m. on a relentless Tuesday when the ER doors blew open. The paramedics didn't even bother with the radio ahead. They burst through the sliding glass, practically breaking the hinges, pushing a gurney that rattled violently against the linoleum. Female, late 60s, unresponsive. BP is tanking, 60/40 and dropping, the lead paramedic shouted, sweat dripping from his chin. We got nothing on her. No ID, just a lot of angry guys in suits outside, refusing to let the cops near them. Clara pushed her heavy glasses up her nose and moved as fast as her bulk allowed. She hated running. Her chest heaved and her knees screamed in protest. But adrenaline was a spectacular painkiller. She shoved past 2 stunned junior residents and gripped the edge of the gurney. Lying there was an older woman with striking, silver-streaked hair, adorned in a custom Chanel tweed suit that had been hastily ripped open by the paramedics. Her skin was the color of wet ash. "Move!" Clara barked, her voice a deep, authoritative rumble that commanded the chaotic room. Just as she reached for the intubation kit, a hand clamped down on her thick forearm. It was Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the chief of surgery, a man who possessed a jawline out of a magazine and a soul as thin as paper. "Step aside, Clara," Pendleton snapped, his eyes flicking over her wide frame with thinly veiled disgust. "This is a VIP. The board just called down. We don't need you fumbling this. I've got it. She's having a massive MI. Prep the cath lab." Clara looked at the monitor. The EKG showed electrical alternans. The QRS complexes were changing height from beat to beat. Pendleton was already reaching for the defibrillator paddles. "It's not a standard myocardial infarction, Arthur," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave. She shoved her weight forward, physically wedging her broad shoulders between Pendleton and the patient. Her sheer mass was an immovable object. "Look at her neck veins. They're distended, even sitting at a 30-degree angle. Muffled heart sounds. It's Beck's triad. She's in cardiac tamponade. If you shock her or pump her full of blood thinners for the cath lab, you will kill her right now." "I am your superior," Pendleton hissed, his face flushing crimson. "And I am the one holding the needle," Clara shot back. She didn't wait for permission. The woman's blood pressure alarm was screaming a continuous, flatline warning. Clara grabbed an 18-gauge spinal needle from the crash cart. She didn't have time for ultrasound guidance. She had to do this blind, relying purely on anatomical landmarks and years of gritty, front-line experience. "Hold her down!" Clara roared at the nurses. She positioned the long needle just below the woman's sternum, angling it toward the left shoulder. Her thick fingers were miraculously steady, possessing a delicate dexterity that always shocked onlookers. She plunged the needle in. The room held its collective breath. Pendleton was already dialing risk management on his cell phone, ready to throw Clara to the legal wolves. Clara pulled back on the syringe. A rush of dark, non-clotting blood filled the plastic tube. She had hit the pericardial sac. Within seconds of draining the fluid that was suffocating the woman's heart, the monitor's erratic screaming shifted to a steady, rhythmic beep. The woman's blood pressure began to climb. The ashen grey of her cheeks was slowly replaced by a faint, living pink. Clara let out a heavy breath, wiping a line of sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand. Her back ached violently. "Get her up to the ICU," Clara instructed the stunned nurses, her chest heaving. "Keep a drain in, and somebody figure out who she is before the suits in the waiting room tear this hospital down to the studs." Pendleton glared at Clara, snapping his phone shut. "You got lucky, Higgins, but you bypassed protocol. You assaulted an attending physician. Don't bother coming in for your shift tomorrow. You're suspended pending a full inquiry." Clara didn't argue. She just looked at the older woman, breathing steadily on the gurney, felt a deep, exhausting satisfaction in her bones, and walked away. She stripped off her blood-speckled scrubs, changed into her oversized grey sweatpants and a baggy graphic tee, and clocked out. She was tired. She was hungry. And she just wanted to go home. The walk from the bus stop to her ground-floor duplex on Willow Creek Drive usually took Clara 10 minutes. Tonight, it felt like an hour. Her inner thighs burned from chafing, and every step sent sharp spikes of agony through her heels. The Chicago wind was biting, slicing through her thin fleece jacket. She was so focused on the pain in her feet and the lingering anger over Pendleton's blatant discrimination that she almost didn't notice the vehicles until she was standing right in her driveway. 4 matte black Cadillac Escalades, engines purring with deep, menacing aggression, were parked haphazardly across the curb, completely blocking the street. The streetlights had been intentionally shot out, leaving the area bathed only in the harsh, red glow of the SUV's taillights. Clara stopped cold. Her breath plumed in the freezing air. She clutched her worn leather purse to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. The doors of the vehicles opened in terrifying unison. A dozen men stepped out. They weren't street thugs. They wore tailored Italian wool coats, leather gloves, and an air of quiet, lethal discipline. Several of them casually adjusted their jackets, revealing the cold steel of holstered firearms. Clara took a step back, her mind racing. Had she crossed a gang? Had the woman she saved been the target of a hit? And now they were tying up loose ends by killing the doctor who saved her. From the center Escalade, a man emerged. The others parted for him instantly, lowering their heads in absolute deference. He was strikingly tall, with sharp, aristocratic features carved from pale stone, and hair dark as a raven's wing. He wore a midnight blue Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Clara's medical school debt. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps clicking menacingly on the frosted concrete. His dark eyes locked onto her, scanning her large, disheveled frame without a flicker of expression. "Dr. Clara Higgins," the man said. His voice was a rich, dark velvet, carrying a faint trace of a Sicilian accent. It was quiet, yet it demanded complete attention. "Who wants to know?" Clara rasped, trying to keep her double chin held high, though her knees were practically knocking together. "My name is Alessandro Costa," he replied, stopping 3 feet from her. The smell of expensive oud and cold ozone radiated from him. 2 hours ago, a fool in a white coat tried to electrocute my mother. You shoved him out of the way and jammed a needle into her chest. Clara swallowed hard. The Costa family. It was a name whispered in the dark corners of Chicago. They controlled the ports, the unions, and supposedly half the politicians in the state. I performed an emergency pericardiocentesis, Clara stammered, her medical brain trying to override her primal terror. She was in cardiac tamponade. If I hadn't done it, she would have died in 3 minutes. I was just doing my job. Alessandro stared at her. He didn't look angry, which somehow made him infinitely more terrifying. He reached into his coat pocket. Clara flinched, bracing for a bullet, squeezing her eyes shut. Instead of a gunshot, she heard the rustle of paper. She opened her eyes. Alessandro was holding out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "I am aware of what you did," Alessandro said softly. "My men in the room reported everything, including the part where you were fired for saving her life." "Suspended," Clara corrected automatically, then immediately wanted to punch herself for correcting a mafia boss. Alessandro's mouth twitched, a micro-expression that might have been amusement. "Suspended. Regardless, St. Jude Medical Center will no longer be requiring your services, because as of tonight, you work for me." Clara blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "My mother, Rosa, is recovering at my estate. I do not trust hospitals. I do not trust doctors who look at a patient and see a political liability," Alessandro stated, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You saw a dying woman, and you risked your career to save her. You are coming with us. Now." "I can't just leave," Clara protested, her voice cracking. "I have a cat. I have a life. You can't just kidnap a doctor." "I am not kidnapping you, Dr. Higgins. I am aggressively recruiting you," Alessandro replied smoothly. He gestured to the envelope. "There is a cashier's check for $250,000 in here. A signing bonus. Your salary will be $50,000 a month. You will live on my estate. You will monitor my mother until she is fully recovered. If she lives, you will be a very wealthy woman. If she dies because of your negligence." He let the sentence hang, cold and deadly in the winter air. Clara looked at the envelope, then at the ring of armed men surrounding her. It wasn't a job offer. It was a draft. "My cat needs specialty renal food," Clara blurted out, a bizarre panic response. Alessandro stared at her for a long, silent moment. The large, frightened, fiercely talented woman standing before in baggy sweatpants was utterly perplexing to a man used to terrified compliance or polished deceit. "My men will retrieve the cat and the food," Alessandro said, gesturing to one of his heavily armed lieutenants, who nodded with absolute seriousness. "Get in the car, Doctor." The Costa estate was less a home and more a modern fortress, situated on a private peninsula overlooking Lake Michigan. Massive iron gates opened to reveal winding, snow-lined driveways, manicured gardens, and a sprawling stone mansion that practically bled generational wealth. Clara felt entirely out of place. Walking through the marble foyer, she was acutely aware of her squeaking Brooks sneakers and the way her heavy thighs brushed together. The household staff, all impeccably dressed and silent, glided past her, casting discreet but unmistakable glances at her size. Clara's cheeks burned. She was used to being the largest person in the room, but in this temple of wealth and perfection, she felt like an ogre crashing a royal ball. Alessandro led her up a sweeping mahogany staircase to the east wing. My mother's suite is here. We have outfitted the adjacent room with whatever medical equipment you might need. If you require anything else, you speak to me directly." He pushed open a set of double oak doors. The room was massive, bathed in warm light, with a hospital-grade bed positioned in the center. Rosa Costa lay there, hooked up to a state-of-the-art monitor. She looked frail, but her breathing was strong. Clara immediately slipped into her professional element. The moment she saw the monitors, her insecurities vanished. She was a doctor, and this was her domain. She walked over, checking the IV lines, reading the vitals, and gently inspecting the dressing over the puncture wound on Rosa's chest. Alessandro stood by the door, watching her intently. He watched how her thick fingers, surprisingly nimble, adjusted the dials. He watched the deep, focused crease between her brows. Most women in his orbit were obsessed with their appearance, starving themselves to fit into a mold. Clara Higgins clearly didn't fit any mold. She took up space. She was unapologetic in her physical mass when she worked, commanding the room with her presence. "Her vitals are stabilizing," Clara said, not turning around. "But I need her full medical history. The tamponade didn't happen in a vacuum. She has no history of trauma, which means the fluid buildup in her pericardial sac was caused by something systemic. An infection, a malignancy, or—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Rosa's fingernails. "Or what?" Alessandro's voice was dangerously low as he stepped further into the room. Clara gently lifted Rosa's limp hand. She traced her thumb over the older woman's nail beds. There were faint, white, horizontal bands across the nails. Mace lines. Clara felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. She turned to face Alessandro, her heart hammering. "Mr. Costa, does your mother take any herbal supplements? Has she had any strange gastrointestinal issues over the last few weeks? Nausea? Numbness in her fingertips?" Alessandro's eyes hardened, turning to obsidian. "She complained of a stomach bug for the last week, and she said her hands felt like they were vibrating." "Why?" Clara swallowed hard, her mouth dry. The fluid around her heart, it wasn't a natural cardiac event. "I need to run a toxicology screen immediately, but looking at these lines on her nails and hearing her symptoms," Clara took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say could start a war. "Your mother wasn't just sick, Mr. Costa. She is being poisoned. Slowly. Heavy metal toxicity, likely thallium. It mimics natural heart failure." The silence in the room became suffocating. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alessandro didn't yell. He didn't move. But the sheer aura of violence that radiated from him made Clara want to shrink into herself. "Thallium," he repeated, the word tasting like venom in his mouth. "A slow poison, administered by someone close." "Yes," Clara whispered, gripping the edge of the clipboard so hard her knuckles turned white. Alessandro finally looked at her, his gaze piercing right through her. "Who else knows this?" "No one," Clara said quickly. "The hospital just saw a failing heart. Dr. Pendleton would never have looked deep enough to check her nail beds." Alessandro reached out. Clara flinched back, expecting violence, but his large, warm hand gently gripped her chin. He forced her to look up into his dark, storm-filled eyes. His thumb casually brushed against the soft, full curve of her jawline. The physical contact sent a bizarre, terrifying electric shock straight down Clara's spine. "You saved her life at the hospital," Alessandro murmured, his face inches from hers. "And you just saved it again. You are more valuable to me than you realize, Dr. Higgins." He dropped his hand, turning sharply towards the door. "Lock this room from the inside. Do not let anyone in. Not the maids, not the guards, not even my brothers. You eat what I bring you. You drink from sealed bottles. The person trying to kill my mother is inside this house." He paused at the door, looking back at her standing nervously by the bed. "Keep her alive, Clara, and I will burn this city to the ground for you." As the heavy oak doors clicked shut and locked from the outside, Clara was left alone in the gilded cage. She was a fat, overworked doctor from Queens who just wanted to pay off her loans. Now, she was the only thing standing between a mafia matriarch and a phantom assassin. And worst of all, her skin still burned where the mafia boss had touched her. For 72 hours, the oak doors of the East Wing suite remained bolted shut. Inside her gilded high-security medical bunker, Clara established a rigorous, uncompromising rhythm. The sprawling room smelled of bitter antiseptic and the faint, lingering scent of Rosa's expensive French perfume. Clara had essentially built an intensive care unit from scratch, utilizing the black market medical supplier, Alessandro, kept on retainer. The most vital acquisition had been a rapid, covert delivery of Prussian blue, ferric hexacyanoferrite, the specific antidote required to bind the thallium in Rosa's digestive tract and flush it from her system. Clara barely slept. She dozed in a plush velvet armchair next to the bed, her heavy frame sinking into the cushions, waking at the slightest change in the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Her size 26 scrubs were practically glued to her skin, stiff with dried sweat and the sheer stress of keeping a mafia matriarch tethered to the mortal coil. Alessandro was her only contact with the outside world. He came 3 times a day, unlocking the door with his own master key, bearing meals and supplies. He never sent a servant. He never sent a guard. On the evening of the 3rd day, the heavy deadbolt clicked, and Alessandro stepped inside. The icy Chicago winds battered the reinforced glass of the suite's windows, but inside, the air grew instantly thick with his presence. He was dressed down for the first time, wearing a black cashmere turtleneck that clung to the broad, athletic lines of his chest and dark-tailored trousers. He was carrying a large, grease-stained cardboard box that smelled miraculously of garlic, oregano, and baked cheese. Clara, who was meticulously documenting Rosa's urine output, paused. Her stomach let out a treacherous, echoing growl. She flushed a deep, mortified red, her hand flying to her abdomen as if she could smother the sound. Alessandro's mouth twitched into that rare ghost of a smile. He set the box down on the mahogany writing desk. "I noticed you barely touched the sea bass and quinoa my chef prepared for lunch," he said, his rich voice rumbling through the quiet room. "I had my men make a run to Lou Malnati's. Deep dish, sausage and extra cheese. I figured a Chicago native requires proper fuel to work miracles." Clara stared at the box, her mouth watering violently. In the hospital, the thin athletic nurses always judged her lunches, offering passive-aggressive comments about her carbohydrate intake. She was used to eating in hiding, ashamed of her appetite. But Alessandro wasn't looking at her with pity or disgust. He was looking at her like she was an engine that needed premium coal to keep burning. "Thank you," Clara murmured, stepping away from the monitors. She moved to the desk, her thighs rubbing together in the familiar, uncomfortable friction of her unwashed scrubs. Alessandro didn't leave. He stood leaning against the doorframe, watching her as she pulled a massive, decadent slice of pizza onto a china plate. "Her vitals are stabilizing," Clara said between bites, desperate to fill the heavy silence with clinical data. "The Prussian blue is working. The thallium levels in her blood are dropping. She's going to wake up soon, Mr. Costa." "Alessandro," he corrected softly. He took a step toward her. The sheer height of the man was intimidating, but Clara stood her ground. "You have earned the right to use my name, Clara." Before she could process the way her name sounded on his lips, like a dark, private secret, a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against the heavy oak doors. Clara jumped, dropping her crust onto the plate. Alessandro's entire demeanor shifted in a microsecond. The relaxed, observing man vanished, replaced by an apex predator. His hand slid smoothly beneath his cashmere sweater, resting on the grip of a concealed weapon at the small of his back. "Who is it?" Alessandro's voice was a whip crack of authority. "Alessandro, it is Matteo," a muffled older voice called from the hallway. "Open the door. I brought a specialist, a real doctor. The family is not comfortable with you keeping Rosa locked away with some disgraced, overweight hack you pulled off the street." Clara's breath hitched. The words disgraced and overweight hack hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She looked down at her stained scrubs and her thick waist, the familiar, crushing weight of lifelong insecurity threatening to swallow her whole. Alessandro's eyes locked onto hers. He saw the flinch. He saw the exact moment the light dimmed in her eyes. His jaw clenched so hard, a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. "Dr. Higgins is the only physician my mother needs, Uncle Matteo," Alessandro called back, his voice deceptively calm, though his dark eyes were burning. "Alessandro, don't be a fool. I have Dr. Arthur Pendleton here from St. Jude Medical. He is the chief of surgery." Matteo pressed, rattling the brass doorknob. "Let him in to assess her." Clara's blood ran ice cold. Pendleton, the man who had nearly killed Rosa with his arrogance, was standing on the other side of the door. If he came in and saw the Prussian blue, he would realize it was a poisoning. He would report it, or worse. He might be working with the poisoner to finish the job under the guise of medical intervention. "No," Clara whispered fiercely, stepping in front of Rosa's bed, her large frame forming a human shield. "He will kill her. He'll administer blood thinners and claim it was a secondary myocardial infarction." Alessandro looked at the fierce, unyielding determination on Clara's flushed, round face. She was terrified, yet she was standing between a mafia boss and the door, ready to fight for her patient. "Do not move from this spot," Alessandro ordered her. He unbolted the door and stepped out into the hallway, pulling the heavy oak shut behind him with a definitive click. Clara stood frozen in the silence of the room. For a moment, there was nothing. Then she heard a sickening thud, followed by a sharp, pathetic yelp of pain that sounded distinctly like Dr. Arthur Pendleton. "You bring this incompetent butcher into my home?" Alessandro's voice bled through the wood, no longer calm, but vibrating with a terrifying, lethal rage. "A man who nearly murdered your sister on a gurney?" "Alessandro, please. He said he could fix her," Matteo cried out, his voice trembling. "Dr. Higgins fixed her," Alessandro snarled. "If you ever bring another physician onto this estate, or if you ever speak of Dr. Higgins with disrespect again, I will remove your tongue, Matteo. Now get this bleeding piece of garbage off my floor before I have him thrown into the lake." Footsteps scrambled away. The hallway fell dead silent. A moment later, the door clicked open. Alessandro stepped back inside. His knuckles were slightly red. He calmly adjusted his cashmere sweater and looked at Clara, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes behind her heavy glasses. "As I said," Alessandro murmured, his eyes softening as he looked at her, "you are the only doctor in this house." By the morning of the 5th day, Rosa Costa finally opened her eyes. Clara was at her side instantly, adjusting the IV drip and checking her pupillary response with a pen light. The older woman blinked against the soft lamplight, her gaze darting around the room, before settling on Clara's face. "You are not the pompous fool from the emergency room," Rosa rasped, her voice dry as autumn leaves. "No, ma'am," Clara said gently, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Dr. Clara Higgins. I took over your care." Rosa's dark eyes, so fiercely identical to her son's, swept over Clara. She didn't look at Clara's wide hips or thick arms with disdain. She looked at her with the sharp, calculating assessment of a woman who had survived 50 years in organized crime. "You are the one who stopped the electrical machine," Rosa whispered, piecing the fragmented memories together. "You stabbed me in the chest." "I drained the fluid suffocating your heart," Clara corrected gently, pouring a small cup of crushed ice and water. She guided the straw to Rosa's lips. "You had a cardiac tamponade, but it wasn't a natural heart attack, Mrs. Costa." Before Rosa could respond, the door unlocked, and Alessandro strode in. The moment he saw his mother awake, the cold, impenetrable mask he wore slipped, revealing a flash of profound relief. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking his mother's frail hand and pressing it to his forehead. "Mama," he breathed out. "I am Alif Alessandro," Rosa said, her hand weakly stroking his dark hair. "Thanks to your large friend here, though my stomach feels as if I have swallowed broken glass." "That is the thallium," Clara stated, her professional tone cutting through the emotional reunion. Both Costas looked at her. "Someone has been feeding you a heavy metal poison for weeks. It built up in your system, causing the fluid around your heart." Rosa's face hardened into a mask of pure, terrifying ice. "Poison. We need to know what you ate or drank in the days leading up to your collapse," Clara urged, stepping closer. "Something that only you consumed. The chef cooks for the whole estate, so it wouldn't be the main meals, or Alessandro would be sick as well. Did you take any special supplements? A specific brand of coffee?" Rosa closed her eyes, thinking back. "My tea," she said softly. "My brother, Matteo, returned from Sicily 3 weeks ago. He brought me a special blend of chamomile and valerian root from an apothecary in Palermo. He insisted I drink a pot every night for my insomnia. He even prepared it for me himself." Alessandro stood up slowly. The air in the room seemed to undergo a rapid drop in pressure. The realization that his own uncle had tried to assassinate his mother and had then tried to bring a compromised doctor to finish the job solidified into a cold, absolute death sentence in his eyes. "Where is this tea kept?" Alessandro asked, his voice dead of all emotion. "In the private pantry down the hall," Rosa replied. Alessandro turned to the door, but paused. He looked back at Clara. "Watch her. Lock the door behind me." While he was gone, Rosa studied Clara intently. "He likes you," the old woman stated matter-of-factly. Clara nearly dropped her clipboard. She let out a nervous, self-deprecating laugh. "Excuse me, Mrs. Costa, I'm his employee, and I'm me." She gestured vaguely to her heavy frame. "Men like your son don't look at women like me. Men like my son are surrounded by plastic dolls who want his money," Rosa countered, her eyes sharp. "Alessandro does not value what is common. He values what is rare. Competence is rare. Loyalty is rare. Do not insult my son's intelligence by thinking he only sees the size of your waist." 10 minutes later, Alessandro returned. He wasn't carrying tea. He was carrying a large, glossy, black shopping bag bearing the logo of Marina Rinaldi, an ultra-luxury Italian fashion house known exclusively for plus-size women. He placed the bag on the armchair and handed Clara a small, sealed glass jar containing loose tea leaves. "Test it," he ordered. Clara took the jar to her makeshift lab station. She used a rapid chemical reagent kit she had requested 2 days prior. She extracted a small amount of the tea, crushed it, and applied the liquid drops. If heavy metals were present, the solution would turn a violent, opaque yellow. 10 seconds passed. The liquid in the test tube flared bright, toxic yellow. Clara held it up. "It's laced, highly concentrated." Alessandro stared at the vial. "Matteo," he whispered, the name a curse. He turned to Clara, his eyes dark and heavy. "My men are securing the estate. No one leaves. I have to deal with my uncle." He paused, gesturing to the glossy black bag on the chair. "I had my assistant pull your clothing sizes from your medical files at St. Jude. You have been wearing the same hospital scrubs for 5 days. There are silk loungewear sets, cashmere sweaters, and proper trousers in there. Put them on. You are not a prisoner, Clara. You are the savior of this family. You should feel like it." Clara stood, stunned, as Alessandro turned and left the room, the heavy door locking once more. With trembling hands, she opened the bag. Inside lay the most beautiful fabrics she had ever touched. Rich emerald greens, deep sapphires, and soft charcoal greys. She pulled out a high-waisted, wide-leg trouser and a beautifully draped silk blouse. She walked into the suite's attached marble bathroom and stripped off her foul, stiff scrubs. She washed her face, ran a comb through her messy brown hair, and slipped into the new clothes. They fit flawlessly. They didn't pinch or squeeze. They draped elegantly over her wide hips and heavy thighs, accentuating the generous curves of her bust and the narrowness of her waist. For the first time in a decade, Clara looked in the mirror and didn't see a tired, fat workhorse. She saw a woman, a formidable, powerful woman. Alessandro had seen her. Really seen her. He hadn't just bought a tent to cover her up. He had commissioned luxury to drape her exactly as she wore. When she stepped back into the bedroom, Rosa was watching her. The old woman smiled weakly. "Like I said, Dr. Higgins," Rosa murmured, "he values what is rare." Downstairs, the muffled sound of a single, silenced gunshot echoed through the cavernous halls of the Costa estate. Clara flinched, but she didn't panic. The ghost haunting the house had been exorcised. The war was just beginning, but Clara realized with a shocking jolt of clarity that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The muted pop of the suppressed gunshot reverberated through the floorboards, a chilling punctuation mark on Clara's new reality. When Alessandro finally returned to the East Wing an hour later, the sharp scent of cordite clung to his cashmere sweater, mingling darkly with his expensive oud cologne. There was a single dark speck of blood on his left cuff. Clara stood by the window, the heavy silk of her new Marina Rinaldi trousers swishing softly around her ankles. She expected to feel terror. She expected to hyperventilate. But as Alessandro's dark, fathomless eyes locked onto hers, all she felt was a bizarre, grounding sense of safety. He had executed his own uncle to protect his mother. The sheer, terrifying absolute of his loyalty was intoxicating. He paused, taking in her transformed appearance. The deep emerald silk blouse draped perfectly over her generous curves, catching the ambient light of the room. The harsh fluorescent exhaustion of the hospital had been washed away, replaced by the striking, formidable presence of a woman who finally looked as competent as she actually was. "Emerald is your color, Dr. Higgins," Alessandro murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. He didn't look at her like she was a project. He looked at her like she was a queen who had finally put on her crown. Over the next 2 weeks, the sprawling Costa estate transformed from a terrifying fortress into a surreal, opulent sanctuary. Under Clara's meticulous, round-the-clock care, Rosa Costa didn't just survive, she thrived. The heavy metal toxicity was slowly flushed from her system using the Prussian Blue regimen. Medtronic telemetry monitors hummed steadily, reporting perfect cardiac rhythms. As Rosa regained her strength, she took a distinct liking to Clara. The Mafia matriarch recognized a kindred spirit in the heavy-set, fiercely intelligent doctor. They spent afternoons drinking imported, heavily vetted Earl Grey tea, while Rosa delivered blunt, unapologetic life lessons. "You walk like you are apologizing for the space you take up, Clara," Rosa scolded one afternoon, adjusting the silk shawl around her shoulders. "You hunch your shoulders. You make yourself small." "Why?" Clara looked down at her thick thighs, the old insecurities bubbling up. "Because the world generally prefers women like me to be invisible, Rosa. At St. Jude's, if I took up too much space, I was deemed aggressive or unprofessional. Thin doctors are assertive. Fat doctors are overbearing. It's just the reality," Rosa scoffed, slamming her teacup onto the saucer. "The reality of weak men. My son does not surround himself with fragile, starving birds. He requires a pillar, a foundation. You held my heart in your hands, Clara. You stood between a dying woman and a hospital board. Stop shrinking. Take up the room. Demand the air." It wasn't just Rosa who noticed Clara. Alessandro's presence became a constant, gravitational force in her daily routine. He began taking his dinners in the East Wing with them. He didn't order the private chef to cook dietetic, flavorless meals to shame her. Instead, feasts from Chicago's most elite establishments arrived heavily guarded. Thick prime ribeyes from Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, decadent truffle pastas, and rich, dark chocolate torts. One evening, after Rosa had fallen asleep, Clara was sitting at the mahogany desk, reviewing St. Jude's internal medical journals on her laptop. Alessandro walked in, holding 2 crystal tumblers of Macallan 25. He set one down next to her keyboard. "You are working late," he observed, leaning against the edge of the desk. His dark trousers and crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal corded, tattooed forearms, made Clara's pulse skip a beat. "I'm keeping up with surgical literature," Clara replied, wrapping her fingers around the cool crystal glass. "Just because I'm practicing private medicine doesn't mean I can let my trauma skills atrophy." "You miss the chaos of the ER," Alessandro noted, his eyes tracking the soft curve of her neck. "I miss the puzzle," Clara admitted softly. "I miss pulling someone back from the edge of the cliff when everyone else has given up." Alessandro reached out. His large, calloused hand covered hers, where it rested on the mouse pad. The heat of his skin was electric. "You pulled my mother from the cliff, but you must understand, Clara, my Uncle Matteo was not a mastermind. He was a greedy, bitter old man. He lacked the resources to procure military-grade thallium and sneak it into this country." Clara's medical mind instantly snapped to attention, the romantic tension giving way to sharp alarm. "You're saying someone supplied him?" "Dante, my lieutenant, intercepted communications this morning," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Matteo held a secret meeting at the Peninsula Chicago a month ago. He met with Vincent Marcano. The Marcano Syndicate has been trying to seize our shipping contracts at the port of Chicago for a decade. With my mother dead, they assumed I would be destabilized. grieving, prone to mistakes. Clara swallowed hard. They know Matteo is dead. They know he failed, Alessandro corrected, his thumb gently tracing the knuckles of Clara's hand. And in our world, when a quiet assassination fails, the next attempt is never quiet. As if summoned by his words, the heavy, reinforced windows of the suite suddenly rattled violently. It wasn't the wind. It was the concussive shockwave of an explosion somewhere near the estate's main gates. Instantly, the crystal chandeliers above them flickered and died. The estate was plunged into total darkness, save for the eerie, glowing red emergency lights that kicked on along the baseboards. Alessandro didn't flinch. He moved with terrifying, fluid speed. He drew a sleek, black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster and grabbed Clara by the waist, pulling her massive frame behind the solid oak desk with effortless strength. "Code Black!" Alessandro's voice barked into a two-way radio on his lapel. "Perimeter breach! Marcano hit squad! Secure the east wing!" Gunfire erupted outside, the sharp, chaotic staccato of automatic weapons echoing over the frozen lake. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were completely steady. This was a different kind of trauma bay, but the rules of triage were exactly the same. Panic meant death. Focus meant survival. "Rosa," Clara whispered fiercely in the dark, crawling toward the hospital bed. The older woman was already awake, her eyes wide, but surprisingly calm. "Get her into the ensuite bathroom. It's reinforced steel and ballistic glass," Alessandro ordered, his eyes scanning the hallway through a crack in the oak doors. "Do not come out until I tell you." Clara nodded. She practically hoisted Rosa out of the bed. Despite her size, Clara was incredibly strong. Years of rolling 300-pound unconscious patients had built dense, functional muscle beneath her curves. She half-carried Rosa into the massive marble bathroom, locking the heavy door behind them. Inside the dark bathroom, Clara quickly ripped open a Stryker emergency trauma bag she had stashed under the sink. She pulled out bandages, tourniquets, and hemostatic gauze. "Are you afraid, Clara?" Rosa asked softly in the darkness, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoing muffled through the walls. Clara gripped a scalpel, her jaw set. "I don't have time to be afraid, Rosa. I'm on the clock." The battle for the Costa estate raged for exactly 14 minutes. To Clara, trapped in the darkness of the reinforced bathroom, it felt like a bloody eternity. The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed in the master bedroom, just outside their door. Clara heard shouts in Italian, the shattering of expensive vases, and the terrifying, deafening roar of close-quarters gunfire. Then, a heavy body slammed against the bathroom door, sliding down the wood with a wet, sickening thud. "Alessandro!" Rosa cried out, her composure finally cracking. Clara pressed her ear against the steel-reinforced wood. She heard a wet, rattling cough. It was a sound she knew intimately from the darkest nights in the St. Jude trauma bays. It was the sound of a man drowning in his own blood. "Clara!" Alessandro's voice came through the door, barely a wet rasp. "The room is clear. Open it." Clara unbolted the lock and threw the door open. Alessandro lay on the marble floor, his back propped against the doorframe. The crisp white shirt he had worn was soaked in a massive, expanding bloom of dark, arterial crimson. He had taken a high-caliber round directly to his upper right chest, just beneath the collarbone. "Oh, God!" Clara breathed, her medical instincts overriding her horror. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the shattered glass and debris littering the bedroom floor. Her heavy thighs hit the marble with a thud as she positioned herself over him. Dante, Alessandro's heavily tattooed lieutenant, sprinted into the room, his assault rifle raised. "Boss, the Marcanos are wiped out. We got them all, but... Jesus Christ, he's bleeding out." "Shut up and hold his shoulders down," Clara roared, her voice echoing with absolute, terrifying authority. The mob enforcer instantly obeyed the fat doctor, dropping his weapon and pinning Alessandro's thrashing shoulders to the floor. Clara ripped Alessandro's ruined shirt open, her thick fingers moving with blinding speed. The entry wound was small, but it was bubbling. Air was being sucked into his chest cavity with every agonizing breath he took, compressing his right lung and pushing his heart out of alignment. "Tension pneumothorax. He's got a sucking chest wound," Clara diagnosed rapidly, her hands smeared with his warm blood. She grabbed a specialized Asherman chest seal from her striker bag, peeled the backing, and slapped the adhesive plastic over the bullet hole. The one-way valve immediately stopped the air from entering, but the damage inside was already critical. Alessandro's lips were turning a faint, terrifying shade of blue. His dark eyes, usually so sharp and commanding, were rolling back. His trachea was visibly deviating to the left, a lethal sign that the trapped air inside his chest was crushing his heart. His blood pressure is crashing. The seal isn't enough. The trapped air needs out now, or his heart stops in 60 seconds, Clara stated, her voice eerily calm. She didn't have a sterile operating room. She didn't have Dr. Pendleton to condescend to her. She only had her brain, her hands, and the man she realized she was desperately, undeniably in love with dying on the floor. "What do you need?" Dante yelled in a panic. "I need to put a tube in his chest," Clara said. She grabbed a bottle of betadine, sloshing it recklessly over the right side of Alessandro's rib cage. She snatched a number 10 scalpel and a thick 28 French plastic chest tube from the bag. She leaned close to Alessandro's face. She didn't care about the blood. She cupped his pale cheek with her large, warm hand. "Alessandro," she said firmly, forcing his fading eyes to lock onto hers. "I have no anesthetic. I am going to cut into your chest and force a plastic tube through your muscle and into your pleural space. It is going to hurt more than the bullet." Alessandro's chest heaved. He managed a weak, blood-stained smirk. His hand lifted, his fingers weakly grasping her thick waist, grounding himself in her absolute solidity. "Do it, mia Luce," he rasped, calling her my light in Italian. "I trust you." Clara didn't hesitate. She palpated the 5th intercostal space, just anterior to the mid-axillary line. With a swift, brutal, and perfectly calculated motion, she drove the scalpel through his skin and muscle. Alessandro let out a guttural, agonizing roar that echoed through the shattered mansion. Dante looked away, looking sick, but Clara's eyes never wavered. She dropped the scalpel, shoved her gloved finger into the bloody incision to clear the tissue, and brutally forced the thick plastic tube directly into his chest cavity. Instantly, a massive rush of trapped air and dark blood hissed out of the tube. The pressure inside Alessandro's chest vanished. Within 10 seconds, the blue tint faded from his lips. His trachea shifted back to the center of his throat. He took a massive, shuddering gasp of air, his right lung expanding fully for the first time in minutes. Clara clamped the tube to a portable drainage system, securing it with heavy surgical tape. She sat back on her heels, her chest heaving, sweat pouring down her face, her beautiful emerald silk blouse completely ruined with the blood of a mafia kingpin. She had done it. She had pulled him from the absolute brink. Alessandro lay on the floor, breathing heavily, staring up at the ceiling. Then he turned his head to look at Clara. She was panting, her hair a mess, her large body covered in gore, looking like a terrifying, magnificent, avenging angel. "You," Alessandro whispered, his voice gaining strength with every breath. "You are magnificent." 2 weeks later, the war in Chicago was over. The brutal, calculated retaliation against the Marcano family, orchestrated by Alessandro from a medical bed, was swift and absolute. The commission recognized the Costa family's undisputed dominance, and the port contracts were sealed in blood. The east wing of the estate had been completely restored, the shattered glass replaced with even thicker ballistic panes. Clara stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom. She was wearing a custom-tailored, midnight blue evening gown. It clung perfectly to her wide hips, highlighted her full bust, and fell in elegant, heavy sweeps to the floor. She looked powerful. She looked beautiful. She looked like a woman who commanded respect just by entering a room. Alessandro walked up behind her. His right arm was in a sling, but his posture was as dominant as ever. He didn't look at her reflection. He looked directly at her. He wrapped his good arm around her thick, soft waist, pulling her heavy frame back flush against his solid chest. Clara leaned into his touch, her heart fluttering. "Dr. Pendleton lost his medical license today," Alessandro murmured softly against the curve of her neck, his lips brushing her skin. "It seems an anonymous source leaked proof of massive Medicare fraud and gross surgical negligence to the federal authorities." Clara chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "You shouldn't have gone through the trouble. He disrespected what belongs to me," Alessandro said, his tone dark and fiercely possessive. He turned Clara around to face him. He looked down into her eyes, seeing the brilliant, beautiful, unapologetic woman who had saved his mother, saved his life, and somehow stolen his cold, guarded heart. "You do not work for me anymore, Clara," Alessandro said softly, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. Clara's breath hitched. For a split second, the old, insecure girl from Queens panicked, thinking she was being dismissed. "What do you mean?" Alessandro smiled, a genuine, devastating expression. "I mean, you are my equal. You are the chief medical officer of this entire syndicate. But more importantly," he leaned down, his lips hovering an inch from hers, "you are mine, if you will have me." Clara looked at the terrifying, gorgeous mafia boss. She thought about the sterile, judgmental halls of St. Jude and the lonely, exhausted nights in her cramped duplex. Then she looked at the man who worshipped the very ground her wide, heavy feet walked upon. "I'll have you," Clara whispered. Alessandro crashed his lips down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a fierce, consuming claim. It tasted of danger, of absolute loyalty, and of a future where Clara Higgins would never, ever have to make herself small again. She was the queen of the Costa Empire, a healer wrapped in silk and steel, and the city of Chicago would forever whisper the legend of the heavy-set doctor who held the heart of the underworld in the palm of her hand. Did the story of Dr. Clara Higgins and the ruthless Alessandro Costa keep you on the edge of your seat? The underworld is full of hidden heroes, and Clara proved that true power isn't about fitting a mold. It's about the sheer brilliance and courage you bring to the table. If you loved this intense, pulse-pounding medical mafia romance, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with fellow romance and thriller lovers, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, twist-filled stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have saved the Mafia boss? See you in the next one.